You can get ahead of 99% of Spanish learners by watching this one video. So the other day I was on YouTube and I came across this video by a young guy named Jack teaching you how to communicate more effectively. I absolutely loved the video and I was inspired, so I decided to create a similar style of video but related to Spanish. So here's the big takeaway of this video. If you want to learn Spanish faster than everyone else, then you need to have constant conversations with people, because not only are you going to learn faster, but you're also going to be more motivated to learn the language. Now, when I was 13, I was a tiny middle school kid, and I had never thought about learning another language. Not French, not Spanish, nothing. I was worried about my acne and impressing girls and hoping they would like me. But I had some older friends in high school. They were freshmen at the time, and I thought this was very cool. I thought this made me very, very cool that I had older friends. And they had told me about their Spanish classes, and they had made them out to be these absolutely terrible things that were the end of the universe, and high school Spanish class were basically just the worst thing in the world. They would say things to me like, "Nate, Spanish homework is torture. It takes hours. I don't understand a thing." Or, "Nate, Spanish is by far the worst subject in all of high school." So naturally, when I started high school and I took my very first class, I went into the class nervous, worried, and ultimately sad that I was going to have to take high school Spanish classes for the next 4 years of my life. So, Maestra Lance, my teacher at the time, says, "Hola, clase," and I'm sitting there sweating as much as a 14-year-old could sweat. I don't even know if I knew that I could sweat at the time. And after those 45 minutes of torture, I was confused because those 45 minutes for me ended up being fun. Lots of fun. In fact, I fell in love with the Spanish language. I thought to myself, why has no one ever told me about this before? Knowing this language seems kind of like a superpower. I can make these different sounds, and all of a sudden, a new kind of person can connect with me, and I can connect with them, and we can understand each other. And I found it beautiful and powerful and exciting. And as I started to attend more and more of my high school Spanish classes, I started to experience something interesting. So one of my favorite quotes about language learning comes from Nelson Mandela. He says, "When you speak to a man in his second language, you're speaking to his brain. When you speak to him in his language, you're speaking to his heart." And this was very fascinating for me because as I was learning, I would go out into the real world, whether speaking with friends or with strangers in my community. I'm from Southern California, so I've been very fortunate to have grown up in an environment with lots of native Spanish speakers. And I would go out and I would practice speaking with people. And I would make lots of mistakes, but I would learn a lot. And I started to notice that people would behave very differently with me. All of a sudden, people were smiling and laughing and enjoying the fact that I was trying to speak to them in their mother tongue. Not only that, but people were giving me free food, free drinks. People were asking me for my contact information. People were even inviting me to go visit their families in Mexico. You see, I was speaking to people's hearts and not their minds. And this was very exciting for me. I realized, wow, knowing Spanish is an absolute superpower because now I can connect with a new kind of person, and just by making a couple different sounds, I'm able to reach a certain level of people's soul that makes them want to be friends with me and take care of me and connect with me and learn more about me. And I realized that knowing someone's mother tongue allows you to get rid of that barrier, and it allows you to create love instead of hate. So here's the deal. If you want to improve your Spanish faster than 99% of other people, then you need to have conversations as much as possible in Spanish, preferably with native speakers. Here's the thing. When you are having conversations with people, you're going to learn new vocabulary. You're going to improve the way you form sentences. You're going to more easily understand fast-spoken Spanish. And arguably, the most important thing that having conversations is going to teach you is it's going to teach you how to stay consistent. What I mean by this is when all of a sudden you're having these new exciting experiences, when you are having conversations with people, it's going to motivate you. So if we look at this graphic that I drew here on the whiteboard, here are our conversations. Then that leads to 99% of the progress you're going to make with your Spanish learning. Not to mention, it's going to put you ahead of 99% of other Spanish learners. And that in turn creates memories and experiences and memories that will motivate you and excite you about the learning process. And this cycle continues. El ciclo, meaning cycle. Now, here's an interesting thing. In my high school Spanish classes, many of my peers came from Hispanic families, and many of those families would speak Spanish in the home. However, many of my peers did not speak much Spanish. And it's interesting. What I realized is that I was progressing way faster than all of my Hispanic peers. Now, why is this? I don't come from a Spanish-speaking background. Well, I wasn't afraid to fail. My ego wasn't holding me back. I realized that a very important aspect of learning a language is the ability to have humility. Because if you're not able to accept that you're going to make mistakes and make mistakes in front of other people, then you're not going to progress. You'll be too fearful to even try. You won't try to have conversations with people just based off of fear, and ultimately you won't progress. You see, the number one problem I see with my Spanish students is that they don't try to have conversations with people because they are too scared. It doesn't mean that they aren't knowledgeable enough. It's simply due to fear, the fear of failure. Now, I understand. If I had come from a Hispanic family and I didn't know Spanish, I think maybe I would feel a bit embarrassed and ashamed, as many of my peers did. I think this is very normal. However, you as someone who is learning Spanish, whether you come from a Hispanic background or not, it is very important to understand that if you want to improve with your Spanish, you need to have humility. So remember, the fastest way to learn Spanish, faster than 99% of everyone else, is to have conversations with native speakers as much as possible. Like I said, not only are you going to learn faster, but you're going to be more motivated. And arguably, consistency is more important than the speed of your learning. I still remember a very simple conversation I had with a man years ago. So I was walking around my neighborhood, and as I was strolling around the block, I saw two Hispanic men painting a house. I heard them speaking in Spanish, so I thought I'd say hello in Spanish, and I said a simple buenas tardes. And when I said this, they both looked pleasantly surprised and kind of confused. What is this gringo doing speaking Spanish? And they said, hablas español, do you speak Spanish? I said, sí, más o menos, yes, more or less. And just after those few words, those few sentences, one of the men comes up to me, he sticks his hand out, and he says, gracias. Gracias por aprender mi idioma. Thank you for learning my language. That was it. It was a super simple exchange, a very simple conversation. And I remember walking away, walking back to my house and thinking, wow, that was such a powerful yet simple experience. Just because I know Spanish, I was able to connect with this man in a very simple way, but in a very meaningful and touching way. And that's a cool thing about Spanish, is that you can connect with people's hearts so quickly just by knowing a few new sounds. It's very fascinating and exciting. Now, you might be thinking, Nate, this is great, but I don't have anyone to practice speaking Spanish with. Well, 3 of my favorite resources that you can use are, of course, my Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. I'm biased. Next, italki. It's a great platform where you can get very cheap lessons from native speakers from all over the world. And finally, Tandem. It's a free online language exchange app. You have to be careful. Sometimes there are strange people on there, but for the most part, it's a great way to practice your speaking. One final story for you is that here in Mexico, I don't own a car. And my girlfriend and I wanted to go to this place called El Desierto de los Leones, which is essentially a nature park. So we get in the Uber, we start talking to the driver. He's a very nice man, maybe in his 50s, and it turns out he is from Venezuela. And he starts telling us about how much he loves el desierto de los leones. We say, oh, that's awesome. And he makes a comment saying, oh, you know, I wish I could hang out with you guys. That'd be so cool. And we said, well, why don't you come hang out with us and spend the day with us? And he said, well, I was gonna work later, I don't know. You know what? I'm gonna go with you. And it was amazing. And we actually ended up going to the mountains with him, Los Dinamos, again. And we also went and we did paintball or gocha here in Mexico. We got to meet his son. And I think about this experience and I realized that this would have never been possible if I had never learned Spanish. It's very well that if I only spoke English, we would have just sat there in silence, had a small, awkward conversation, and that would have been it. So remember, the fastest way to learn Spanish, faster than 99% of all the Spanish learners out there, is to have conversations as much as possible. You'll learn faster and you'll be more motivated to learn. Muchas gracias por ver este video y nos vemos en el próximo. Adiós.